Rebecca Kiessling is a delightful, gospel-motivated voice for life. She is also kind of a superstar, and so we're glad to be able to have her here. She's an international pro-life and adoption speaker, which she has been doing since 1995. When you see her, it's hard to believe she was even born in 1995. She has spoken for various pro-life organizations throughout North America and Europe. Also, she is politically influential. It was she who changed the heart of Governor Rick Perry during his presidential campaign, as well as Newt Gingrich and many legislators across the United States, Canada, and Europe. You may be thinking to yourself, what did she change their mind about? I bet that's exactly what she's come here to talk to us about. She has helped pregnant rape victims all around the world to choose life for their children. She is also an attorney, thanks be to God, but most importantly, mother of 5, 2 oldest of whom were adopted. She has 2 babies awaiting the resurrection, having been taken by miscarriage, and her 33-day-old adopted daughter, Cassie, who was born with special needs. She's also poster child for Feminists for Life's ad entitled, "Did I Deserve the Death Penalty?" and author of a pamphlet, Conceived in Rape, A Story of Hope, that comes from Heritage House 76, who's one of our exhibitors here with us. She's the writer and subject of numerous articles and blogs on outlets like LifeNews, LifeSiteNews, and Live Action. She's the founder and president of an organization for which we have deep appreciation, Save the One, and also co-founder of Embryo Defense. It's my privilege and delight to introduce to you our friend Rebecca Kiessling.
That's her now.
I'm very glad to be here this morning. One of my very first speaking events in my first year of speaking was a Lutherans for Life conference in Michigan. I am going to share a little bit of my story. I don't feel like this is a room where I need to convince some people. And at pregnancy fundraisers, like surprising me, there's a lot of people who make the rape exception, and there's also some people who consider themselves to be, pro-choice, who, they don't like abortion, so they support the worker pregnancy centers, but, let's not take it too far, right? And so that's the kind of audience where, there are people there who I need to convince. So in this room, I'm going to assume that you are all 100% pro-life, no exceptions. And so I'm going to talk to you about messaging, and I'm also going to share a little bit about strategy and why no exceptions, no compromise. The very first day of legal research and writing, I went to Wayne State Law School in Detroit. We learned something called IRAC, Issue, Rule, Application, Conclusion. You have to, when writing a legal brief or arguing a case, you have to state the issue, then state what the rule is, or the law, or the principle, and then you have to apply it to the real people in your case at hand, and then you make your conclusion. Now, you could be the best legal scholar there is, you could know all there is to know about the law, but if you don't know how to apply it to the real people in your case, you will lose in court. Likewise, if you merely get up and you tell the story of your clients, but you fail to apply that to the law, again, you will lose. Now, this is the same in the pro-life movement. We need to be able to teach principles in the context of stories. Because if you don't tell the story, you haven't connected the heart. Likewise, if you just tell the story, then they'll summarily dismiss it and say, well, that's just anecdotal. This is what Christ did. He taught principles through stories, through the parables. And that's when it enters into people's psyches, and they remember the principles through those stories. And so I hope you'll see how you can do the same. And that's the purpose of Save the One. We want our stories to be told. On our blog, we have a few hundred stories, and they're categorized. And so you can find stories according to whatever category you're looking for. I even have a special, we have policy pieces, and I have a piece out there that's actually written for clergy. Because as I help people tell their stories, we had several women in our organization who, when writing their stories, said that they became pregnant by rape and their pastors gave them the green light to abort. And in some instances they did, and others they didn't. And so it's very important to be able to know even how to articulate to a pastor what the right response should be. So if you look up Rebecca Kiessling clergy, if you just Google that, you'll actually be able to come right up to that piece. And it's all scripture-based, what scripture has to say about this issue. And a lot of it is some of the principles that I'm going to explain. It's found in scripture, like just the principle that you do not punish a child for the sins of the father. Each is to be punished for their own sin. In a civilized society, you do not punish innocent people for someone else's crime. We actually have a 5-state study, the only one ever done on messaging. Right to Life of Michigan, Georgia Right to Life, and Personhood all commissioned this extensive study that was online, interactive, people got paid to do it, and we showed that in 1 hour they were surveyed at the beginning, halfway through, and at the end, and we could dramatically sway people's opinion on this issue. What about in cases of rape? And that's one of the most important concepts, this sense of justice, that you do not punish innocent people for someone else's crime. All right, well, I'm going to share a little bit of my story, and then I'll move on to those, to the messaging and the strategy issues. I was actually, besides being adopted, I was adopted and raised in a Jewish family. I went to 5 years of Hebrew school 3 days a week. I was bat mitzvahed and everything. The family I grew up in looked nothing alike. My parents looked Jewish, so people would see me in synagogue for the high holidays. You're laughing already. I don't even have to explain, right? Gosh, she doesn't look Jewish. And people would say, oh, who's the little shiksa? Which is a derogatory Yiddish term for a Gentile girl. My classmates, we studied the 12 tribes of Israel and how you could do a family tree and theoretically go all the way back and how significant it was to be one of God's chosen. And my classmates would remind me as I all knew that wasn't really one of them. I was called a master. And I wanted to know how I fit into this world and into God's plan, if at all. My parents had created this fiction that, first of all, the adoption story was very much infertility centered. It was parent centered. There was no big picture worldview, God's plan for your life. I was there to make them whole. And so my takeaway was that you wouldn't have wanted me if you didn't have to. I was second best, last resort. Because they said, oh, we tried for years and years, couldn't get pregnant. And so then we decided to adopt. And so I thought that by meeting my birth family, this would help me figure out where I fit into this world. At a young age, I saw in the mini-series Roots, Alex Haley's Roots, where he was able to go back generations, and it brought deep meaning for so many people in our nation, no matter the race. Just about everybody was watching it, right? And I wanted to find my roots. I often felt like the feather in the movie Forrest Gump, where I was just haphazardly being blown around by the wind. My parents told me that I was adopted through a lawyer and that there was some judge that made us a family. I'm like, who? Who are these people who were pulling strings on my life? And nothing really made sense. My parents took me to see the musical Annie, Little Orphan Annie, got me the album Maybe, and I began to romanticize about this birth family that I had living out there. I wanted to be an attorney from a young age, since I was about 10. My dad, whenever he would be arbitrary in anything, I'd talk him through it, and he'd say, oh, you're good. You should be a lawyer. Growing up in a Jewish family, much of my family members were killed in the Holocaust in the south of Poland, north of Austria. And so from a young age, I grew up knowing that there is such hatred which exists in the world, that there are those who would kill innocent others for no offense of theirs. I thought, as an attorney, like a movie that my father took me to called The Verdict, where he was sort of like this hero, and I just thought, well, that's what I want to do. I want to fight for the underdog. I want to fight for those who are being hurt. I remember growing up in my Jewish community, there would be women who would ask me, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, an attorney, and they'd say, oh, like a feminist. And I'd ask, well, what's a feminist? And they explained, well, it's a woman who fights for women's rights, to help women and to help make women stronger, to be a strong woman. And I thought, well, yeah, I mean, I was always an athlete, and I wanted to be an advocate, help others, and I'm a strong woman. I'm like, sure, like a feminist. And then I started hearing that feminists support abortion. I thought, well, what on earth does killing babies have to do with being a strong woman? That's being a bully. I grew up in that era of, that perfume song, Angelique, right? I can bring home the bacon, light up the pan. And you hear the slogan all the time, I am woman, hear me roar. And now, you gotta be afraid of a baby? How is that being a feminist? When a woman says, I just can't have this baby right now, and you say, you're right, you can't. They take their money and kill their baby. What happened to I am woman, hear me roar? You can have it all. You can have a career. You can go to school. You can have a baby. That's the opposite of feminism. Growing up, abortion wasn't talked a whole lot in my family. When I was 12, my 6-year-old cousin had one, and I recall the discussions being that this was not a good thing. Then a couple years later, my grandfather died, and it was like the floodgates opened. For years, my grandmother would tell this story, that when she was pregnant with my aunt, who's the younger of her 2 children, that my grandfather had told her to go get an abortion. And she said, I never loved him again after that. And she'd cry, how could they do that? How could they kill the babies? And so I learned from her, my little atheist Jewish grandmother, if that makes any sense, that abortion's definitely a bad thing, because that was my aunt who I adored. I had a face to the issue. I couldn't imagine. I was so angry that my grandfather had wanted her to be killed. And then in high school, in a public school, in my freshman year, we studied this issue. I was part of a panel discussion, and I was on the side of life. I had classmates who brought in photos of aborted babies. And I was horrified. But I didn't place myself in those images. I didn't think, oh, that could have been me. No, I thought it was just some sad story where my birth mother couldn't afford to keep me. That's what my parents told me. Oh, your birth mother loved you so much that she chose adoption. I didn't know. But I figured I just won't have the one. It didn't affect my life. I didn't get involved. I wasn't going to these meetings. But then I turn 18. I get my non-identifying information. It had all these details about my birth mother except for her name. Eye color, hair color, height, weight, age of my half-brother, my half-sister. She was actually older. She was like 31 when I was born. Her ethnicity, religious background, occupation, educational level, detailed medical history. But all it said from my biological father was that he was Caucasian and of large build. Yikes. Of course, I thought that sounds like a police description. I called up my caseworker and asked her, was my mom raped? And she said, yeah, I didn't want to tell you. And I was just devastated. I remember feeling so ugly and unwanted, thinking who would ever love me, who's ever going to want to marry me and have a family with me. The explanation from my adopted brother, who had been in and out of jail and prison from a young age, was that social behavior is genetic. What does that mean about who I am? Do I have this ugliness moving inside of me? Am I tainted? And then, and of course I thought when people say, oh, product of rape, like a byproduct. And then what people say about abortion. Oh, I'm pro-life, except in cases of rape. Mm-hmm. Or I'm pro-choice, oh, especially in cases of rape. And I realized they were talking about me, about my life, and I felt like I had at least half the world against me. All these people who don't even know me who are standing in judgment of my life, so quick to allow me to be killed just because of how I was conceived. I later learned from Gallup polls that of self-professing pro-lifers, 60% make the rape exception. This is why when my group Save the One is at the March for Life with our pink signs, we line up along the march route. We file in at the end, but our message is to the pro-life movement. All the young people there who've never thought about this issue. And I felt like at 18 that I was now in a position where I would forever have to justify my own existence, that I would have to prove myself to the world that I shouldn't have been aborted and that I was worthy of living. I had heard the phrase right to life, so I called a local right to life office for the white pages. And there was a woman on the other end of the phone who spoke words of value into my life at a time when I was really hurting. And I asked my adoptive parents, how do you feel about abortion? And what about in cases of rape? And my adoptive father started to say, well, I've always felt like, who am I to say what a woman can or cannot do with her own body? I guess I'd have to say I've always been pro-choice. But Dad, you watched me grow up. You raised me 18 years. You really mean to say that you really believe that my birth mother's body, her choice, was more important than my whole entire life? Really, Dad? You really believe that? And it was like he instantly snapped out of it. And he said, no, I don't believe that. Wow, how would I ever get to a point where I would believe such a thing? And then he started to talk about how, as a professor on a liberal campus, that it was just expected that if you were progressive-minded, you would be pro-choice. But he had never stopped to consider the ramifications of that position, particularly as an adoptive father. So I learned at a minimum at 18 that my story had the potential to change hearts and minds. And as I said, I knew I was in a position where I would have to justify my own existence. About 5 years ago, I got an email from a young woman demanding that I tell her, what good have you done in your life to justify what you did to your mother? And I, first of all, pled my innocence. I said, just to be clear, I was not raping my mother. I was innocent. And she said, I'm just having difficulty accepting that rape babies like you exist. Okay, now that sounds pretty audacious, I understand, but she merely spoke what so many people think, what most people in this country think. She actually gave me the opportunity to provide a defense. And after going back and forth with several emails, she finally apologized and said that I changed her mind about this issue. Now, I struggled still with big picture worldview questions of who am I, why am I here, what is my value, identity, and purpose. I ended up settling in relationships, which became more and more abusive until eventually I was beat up by a boyfriend from law school. He broke my jaw, my front tooth was hanging, I had to have all kinds of surgery to have it put back in, root canal, more surgery to try to save it. I was told I could still end up losing it someday. After 13 years, I had to have it pulled. But I was speaking at a pregnancy resource center fundraiser in Alabama, and an expert in cosmetic dentistry came up to me afterwards and offered to do all of my teeth for free. And not just the 4 teeth, the 3 with the bridge and the 4th to match, but he did 8 teeth with porcelain veneers, so. I share that story with you because it's another example in my life where there was something that happened that was really, really awful. But then something beautiful came out of it. And isn't that what God is famous for? The worst evil that man has in store, God can take and use it for good for his glory. It's the story of Joseph in Egypt when his brothers sold him into slavery. And it is the story of our Savior. And the story does not have to end with the violence having victory. But as we're told in Scripture, God trades beauty for ashes. Well, at the time I'd been beat up, I really hit rock bottom. From all outward appearances, I had so much going for me. I excelled in academics and athletics. I was attending a great law school, but I was completely deteriorating on the inside over this whole issue of value. And that is when Christ called me back to him. Now, the first time I'd ever heard the message of the gospel, I was 15. The first time I'd ever been invited to church, I was 12. My friend Francesca Fraschieri invited me to Duns Scotus. It was a friary. And it was for Palm Sunday. And remember, there were like these monks up above, and I asked them, like, who are they? And she's like, oh, they're monks with the vow of silence. And I thought, well, that's really creepy. Like in the movies. And when it came time for communion, I asked her, what's that? And she said, it's kind of like crackers and juice. And so I stood up with everyone else, and she said, you can't have any. I said, well, why not? She said, it's because you're Jewish. And I thought, oh, it's true. Everything I grew up learning, but they really do hate the Jews. They won't even let me have crackers and juice. Because they didn't share their faith with me. Their parents didn't share their faith with me. We all would just invite each other for the high holidays in the synagogue. You would if you didn't have a membership, an annual membership, you had to purchase your tickets. And they would always sell out and be auxiliaries sanctuary. And so everybody would take turns, and all the families did this. You would go in and buy tickets together, and you'd take turns going in. And so the kids, you just hung out in the bridal salon and bring your friends because you're bored, but don't eat or drink anything all day because that's the day young people are going to be written the book of life. And I was afraid that if I had a crumb, God would smite me, over the next year. Anyhow, that was my childhood experience. And then I had a friend who invited me to hear a special youth speaker when I was 15, a girl from my gymnastics team. And he laid out the message of the gospel. I had never heard this before. Trust me, Jesus is not a popular subject in a Jewish household. And I was so confused by this religion. I mean, you have this, all-knowing figure who knows if you've been good or bad, and he's got these powers to go through the sky and, all over the world in one night. He's a gift giver, and you have this, Christmas tree with all the decorations, and right next to it you have these palm trees and barn animals and this baby that looks, very comfortable cradle in the middle of the snow. And then at Easter there's this Easter bunny, with eggs and chocolate, and then giant-sized bunny, and then this guy that I thought, wow, this is one weird religion. I just can't imagine how it all fits together. Because no one ever shared their faith with me. I wasn't part of their mission field. Because I was Jewish. And then this friend invited me to hear this youth speaker who went through Old Testament prophecy. Which again, never heard. That we were waiting for a Messiah. And it was compelling. And they did raise your hand, all the eyes closed, and all my palms were sweaty. And this was like an act of war. My heart was beating out of my chest. I mean, to my parents, I may as well have said I joined the Nazi party. This was the greatest betrayal. And then they asked you to come on up for an altar call. And I did, I believed. And then when my parents realized what was going on, that I continued to go to church a lot, they took me to see a rabbi who dipped me in water when I was 5 years old and explained, how I was made Jewish. You don't have any choice about it besides whatever your mother's religion is, which is what you always hear. And I'm like, this has nothing to do with faith. And my dad's like, that's right, tradition. And Fiddler on the Roof. But after about 9 months, I felt forsaken by my church friends, fell away, and after I was beat up again, years later, while in law school, one friend invited me back to church, and I went. And that's when I gave my heart back over to Christ, to sing Amazing Grace, and I knew I was no longer dealing just with what had been done to me, but what I had done to hurt myself, to hurt others, to hurt God. I also, at 18, of course, wanted to meet my birth mother. I wanted to know, maybe there was some mistake. I wanted to know I was wanted. And she did want to meet me. She ended up sending me a beautiful letter. After our first conversation on the phone, she right away told me all the circumstances because she knew that I already knew. And she had been abducted at knife point by a serial rapist. She was a single mom heading to the grocery store. And that was really hard to hear, all of those details. But she sounded happy to meet me, and then she sent me this beautiful letter. I'm like, Dearest Rebecca, hoping by now that the shock of finding out all the details of your birth are forgotten. For that was not reason enough of having to give up something as beautiful as you were, nothing as precious as a baby. Mostly when you go through 9 months of the birth all alone, feeling like no one loves you. But you were so perfect and pretty all these years, and you nothing of you, nothing saying you were part of me. Just the memory of carrying a baby that I hoped would one day try to find her real mother, as I always wanted to know my baby. You were always with me in my thoughts, you were always with me in my heart, mostly in July. It seems like a lifetime, I know. When I was sick 2 years ago, I thought I would never get to know my little girl. Would you please see and get me a copy of the letter you sent to the Oakland County judge? It made me cry. Also, I would like copies of your poems. These are things I would like to read. It's been a long 3 weeks looking forward to our meeting. I didn't know how to express my inner feeling. And she put in caps, it's so great, big, beautiful. It's always been my dream. I'm so happy I'm crying. A love that aided me for 19 years. My daughter at last. With love, your mom, Joanne. That was all my dreams come true. I felt so affirmed, and I felt like, yes, I was wanted. I flew home, flew back to college. I went to a few meetings with Students for Life. I didn't get involved at that point. I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. I was far from God. But it gave me the courage and support I felt I needed to finally call my birth mother and ask her about abortion. Because I still needed to know. I wanted to feel safe. And she told me the truth, that if it had been legal in Michigan at the time, that she would have aborted me. And I said, well, you don't mean if you had to do it all over again, right? And she said, no. I said, well, what about everything you said in that letter? And her response was just, you don't know what it was like. And I know that that's true. But I also know that today she's okay. She's doing great. She has a wonderful husband, a beautiful home. And despite the utter horror of her saying that to me, I still chose to nurture a relationship with her, to honor her for the role that she did play in my life. And frankly, I just hoped that if I could prove myself good enough, that she would change her mind. Well, by the time she did change her mind 6 years later, I was in a really good place in my life, now knowing I value identity and purpose in Christ, where I no longer needed to hear that for my own well-being, but it was still great to hear. I was with her when she was making baby clothes for my niece in Florida, who was in an unplanned teen pregnancy with her first great-grandchild. Remember how I told you how my Jewish grandmother lost her first great-grandchild? And it was my birth mother's first great-grandchild who changed her heart. And the reason why it was so significant is when we first met, she sent me photos, multiple photos, that were 5 generations of women. There's a photo of my birth mother as a baby with her great-great-grandmother. And so this was the 4th time in a row that there were 5 generations of women alive, and that meant something to her, to think that that photo would have happened. And it changed her heart. And now, decades later, we're both so thankful that we were protected. She later shared with me that she actually went to 2 back alley illegal abortions. For the first, she said it was the typical conditions that you hear about as to why she should have been able to safely and legally abort me. There was blood and dirt on the floor and on the tables. There was an OBGYN's office in Detroit. She had to go through the back door. And those conditions and the fact that it was illegal caused her to back out, as it did with most women. And then it was arranged for her to meet someone at night by the Detroit Institute of Arts, ironically next to Rodin's, the replica of Rodin's famous Thicker statue, which is actually from a greater work of art called The Gates of Hell, based upon a passage in Dante's Inferno that warns, all who enter here, there's no going back. Someone would approach her, say her name, blindfold her, put her in the back seat of a car, take her somewhere, then abort me blindfold her again and drop her back off. She was told if she was further along than thought, were there any complications, they would have to keep her overnight. And again, she was terrified for her safety, but prepared to go through with it. My aunt was to drive her. She spoke with this abortion doctor on the phone. She expressed concern for her safety. He called her stupid. She said, if you're going to call me names, forget it. And he went on to swear at her profusely, and she hung up the phone. He called her back the next day to try to once again talk her into allowing him to take my life for $750. And the first abortion doctor was $500. Again, she ended up hanging up the phone. I know the time, place, manner, how much money was on my head. I know all these details of my impending death. For some people, their near-death experience is waking up out of a coma to find out that they were almost killed in an automobile accident. For me, this is my life-changing near-death experience. And the fact that I was younger doesn't make it any less real or any less significant. And to be clear, I wasn't lucky. I was protected. Legality matters. And I'm so thankful my life was spared, but I know that there are a million roughly every year who have deserved that same protection. And thank God now in many states they have that protection. There have been studies, again in that 5-state study I told you about. You have all these people, depending on the state, some over 90% would identify, would say that they think abortion's immoral, that they believe abortion's wrong. And if you were actually to question them further, and people say, I don't like abortion. Well, why not? Why don't you like abortion? What's wrong with abortion? Oh, I just don't like it. Well, why not? What's wrong? And then finally say, well, I just feel like that it's killing a human being. Oh, okay, well, let's talk about that. And so you have 90% plus of people who believe that it's wrong, they don't like it. You have women going into abortion clinics crying, knowing it's wrong, and having them anyway. And then you survey people further, do you call yourselves pro-life? The numbers drop, depending on the state. Some of them were 70%, like North Dakota, more than 70% call themselves pro-life. Others, it's below 50%. But you see those numbers plummet. And then you ask the next question. And nationwide, it's over 50% call themselves pro-life. But you ask the next question, should it be illegal? And the numbers plummet between 30 to 40%. We have a problem with cognitive dissonance in this country. We need to spread the message, not just that abortion is wrong. That you shouldn't like abortion. I feel like that's what the pro-life movement has done for decades. Focused on why you shouldn't like abortion. People already don't like abortion. You don't need to convince them of that. You need to explain why it should be illegal and why preborn children should be protected. Interestingly, and again, if you ask, well, are you pro-life, no exceptions, it really plummets, but those people, all of the people who are 100% pro-life are the ones who get it, that this is about legal protection. And we need to work on that. You want to convince people why abortion should be illegal? Start with the hard cases. Properly defend the hard cases. All right, so let's get into that. We already talked about this concept of justice. You do not punish an innocent person for someone else's crime. Again, that's biblical. And there's a lot of different ways of saying it. The U.S. Supreme Court, first of all, I'll ask people, let me ask you, would you support a law which would authorize in the Me Too day and age any woman to just say rape and it would be lawful for her to pay someone to kill her rapist? Or just her innocent child? Because that's what abortion is. You're paying to have someone else killed. From my perspective, they're paid assassins. They're hitmen. And can you imagine if someone tried to propose such a law for rapists? People would be outraged, like all the men would be like, whoa, 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 just, a woman could just say rape just like that, and no right to trial, no anything. And even still, the U.S. Supreme Court has said, in Coker v. Georgia, I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to get legalese on here, but said that rapists do not deserve the death penalty. There is no death penalty for rapists. And the second case of Kennedy v. Louisiana, the Supreme Court said that even for child molesters, it is cruel and unusual punishment. And so how does the innocent child deserve to die for his crime? Okay, so that's one way of saying it. For a politician, they could simply, up in front for a debate, they could say, look, I believe in punishing rapists, not babies. Maybe my opponent believes in punishing babies, but I, for one, stand for punishing rapists. And then, they'll try to say, oh, but we're punishing rape victims. Well, where I come from, children are not punishment. And that's, what Obama had said. All right, and then people ask, what about the rape victim? They are 4 times more likely to die within the next year after the abortion. They have a higher rate of murder, suicide, drug overdose, domestic violence, depression, on and on. It helps perpetuate abusive relationships. We know that sex traffickers and child molesters love abortion. They cannot continue perpetrating without the local abortion clinic. So we use that hashtag all the time. When we use punish rapists, not babies, and we use rapists love abortion. And I get Google alerts of all the case after case after case you see in the news where it was one forced abortion after another. And it destroys the evidence and allows him to continue perpetrating. People ask about, what about the pregnant 10-year-old? That's the most common one. And a week after Dobbs, there was a case out of Ohio where the girl was taken by her mother to Indiana. It proves the point, and I'll tell you why. And it was initially all over the news, but you didn't hear the second half of the story. All right, most of the time they don't report it. People from the Abby Johnson's organization, Men Know None, they talk about all the time how they're told not to report it, they don't want police coming in there, and they just protect and enable these rapists. In this particular case, the Indiana abortion doctor did report it because she wanted to make a national story out of it. But it was a false report, and I'll explain why. The younger a girl is, typically, the further along she is in her pregnancy. Oftentimes, they don't even know she's ovulating. There's something called precocious ovulation. When a girl is being abused, she starts ovulating young. But in this case, she happened to be just past the week for the heartbeat bill in law in Ohio. But usually, they're very far along in these cases where you're talking about late-term abortion, or you could just deliver the baby, or induce labor, or do a C-section. If they say, oh, if she's forced to carry full term, it's going to be dangerous for her life or health. That's a true statement, but it's never the standard of care. You can look on Wikipedia, the number and on, they have the youngest, born to the youngest mothers, there's a whole Wikipedia page, but the Center for Disease Control has a page of every year how many are born to certain ages. And you see how many, you don't hear, there's a lot in the United States that are born as 8, 10, 11, 12, and you don't hear stories that they're all dying. You don't hear a single story of them dying. And if there were, sure, you would hear about it, right? You would for sure hear about it. So the normal standard of care, you deliver early, 4 weeks, and it's safe for the girl and the mother. People think you're going to be able to spare her going through labor. She would have to go through a more dangerous labor. When you deliver a dead baby, you don't have the hormones interacting. The mother's hormones interacting with the child. It's much more difficult to deliver a baby. If they do a DNX, then they rip the baby apart, and those shards of bone can perforate her uterus easily and cause more complications. It's a 3-day procedure where they have to dilate her lampreys. You're not sparing her anything. You're putting her through a lot more trauma, and it's absurd to think that more violence will bring healing. It does not. And then, the younger she is, the more likely it is that it's been going on for years, and that it's a member of the household or a member of the family. And that case in Ohio proved that point. The doctor found a false report because the mother lied. The girl's mother lied and said it was a 17-year-old boy when it was her 27-year-old boyfriend. And this abortion doctor sent her home back into the arms of the perpetrator for 9 days until a detective in Ohio who knows what's up, that doctor should have known. It's likely someone in the household, and she sent her back into his arms. The sad thing is oftentimes a girl's own mother who is either trafficking her or leaving her unprotected, and in this case it proved the point, because when the guy confessed, the girl's mother still defended him. And to this day still says he shouldn't be in jail. And that's the truth of the matter that people need to understand. You should want to protect a girl from the rapist and from the abortion. When a young girl delivers her baby, the baby delivers her out of the abusive situation where she's being left unprotected or trafficked. But all abortion does is protect and enable the trafficker, the abuser, or her mother. So that's how you defend that issue. You stand up for all of us. The name Save the One comes from the parable of the lost sheep. Because people, there's this motto where you say, oh, you save the 99 in exchange for the one. The burning building. And I can't help but think of the parable of the lost sheep. The 99 and the 1. Jesus was all about saving the one. He said, see that you do not despise any of these little ones. And we're despised. We're called demon seed, evil seed, horrible reminder, rapist child, tainting the gene pool, monstrous child. They never call us rape victims child. No, we always get called rapist child. And then they'll say, they call me a rape trophy. There was a woman in my church parking lot who was upset that the church was doing something on a petition drive. And I asked her, well, you know, did God not create me? Like, asked her who created, and she's like, she thought about it. She said, all right, I'll give you that. Wow. And then I asked her, did God not create me for a purpose? And she thought about it and answered, I just think that God might create some children for the purpose of being aborted. Oh, no. And then, so Jesus said, see that you do not despise these little ones, for I tell you, there are angels in heaven always look on the face of my Father in heaven. And he goes right into the parable of the lost sheep, how the good shepherd leaves the 99 to save the one. And he finishes the parable by explaining its point. And he says, for in the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should perish, and neither should we. And when you say you're willing to sacrifice the one, that is completely contrary to the heart of God. It is child sacrifice, and it is an abomination. He's not willing that any should perish. And he's talking about, in context, the little ones who are despised, who are at risk of being killed. And so visit our website, Save the One. We have hundreds of stories, Facebook page, we have lots of videos. And I'm going to open up for Q&A right now. I'd like to just share something real quick. My daughter, when she was little, she was 6 and a half. I used to homeschool, and anyway, she wanted to know how to spell the word conceived. I mean, why do you want to know how to spell conceived? And she said, I'm writing a book. It's a surprise. So she stated it and everything. This is what she wrote. She called it Conceived in Rape. And she said, conceived in rape is not bad, because that's my mom. Rape is bad and abortion is bad because they both hurt people. I thought, why can't politicians just say that? All right, thanks so much. Any questions? Okay.
What's the stick about continuing for incest?
It's still, that child is 100% innocent. She wanted to know, what about incest? I mean, again,
I don't believe you should go with
yeah. When they say, I mean, first of all, everything I said about member of the household, like that all still applies. But what I often hear is, well, the child's going to be born deformed. Well, okay, you don't know that. That's only if there happens to be within the DNA some sort of, potential. Like, but that's not any kind of form of wrong conclusion. If there is some sort of genetic anomaly within their DNA, yeah, they're going to be more likely. But that still doesn't affect the value of a person. When Jesus said it's better to be born with 2 arms and 2 legs, it's the concept that you could be born with 2 arms, 2 legs, and be thrown into the eternal fire. Like, these children with special needs are still valuable. And I mean, that's part of what we defend. So we have a network of over 1,200 conceiving rape mothers from rape, and then hundreds who are told by doctors to abort. So we specialize in defending all of the so-called hard cases through our personal stories. It's really discrimination against disabled children. That's what they're talking about when they say, what about special needs? What about this? What about that? What about Edwards syndrome? What about trisomy? It's eugenics, and they're going after disabled children in the world. And so, I'll say to somebody, oh, so what you're saying is you discriminate. You think certain people are lesser? Oh, so that's what you're telling me. Let's just be clear what we're talking about. We just think it's easier to just kill off people in the world then. I don't discriminate. Every life has value. Would you kill them if they were born? And they do, They do slow code, they refuse to treat these children. So we've worked on Emory and Elliott's law that was out of Ohio. They were born very early and they were left to die. And then there's Simon's law, where out of Missouri, where he had trisomy 18, and she found out that they were giving him comfort pleas, and they put a DNR, do not resuscitating, on his file without telling the parents, and they didn't resuscitate, he died. So, and then there's also the Good Faith Medical Act that came out of Michigan, because there were parents going in to deliver in hospitals and being told, well, just so you know, if your child's born not breathing, we won't resuscitate. Okay, you don't have a chance to switch hospitals now, and we just wanted at least disclosure. So it's like upon request. It should be mandatory. It should be on every website so you can be an informed consumer, right? But boy, the hospital will sure fight that. So yeah, they do all they can to try to, kill them off even after they're born. It's terrible. Eugenics is strong in this country. Yeah, a lot of them, they're pragmatic, that's it. There's eugenics in their heart. They think some lives are not worth living. You know, like the concept out of Germany of useless eaters. It started in the United States. You know, if you watch the movie Ma'afa 21, The History of Eugenics in America, it started here. Okay, so the Governor Perry story, I'll do an abbreviated version. I was in the Citizens United film The Gift of Life with Governor Mike Huckabee backstage pass. I was able to speak to each of the presidential candidates speaking in Iowa in between two of their debates, and changed the hearts of Governor Perry and Newt Gingrich. But I challenged him. Because he said, oh, you're my heroine. I told him all the work I do. And I said, it's funny you say that. Would you be my hero? And he said, yes, I would. Like, you make that rape exception. So, challenged him that, you believe that I deserve the death penalty for the crime? The man who raped my mother? And he said, no, I don't. I'm like, well, and he said that this film and this event are supposed to be all about changing hearts and minds, and you're changing my heart, and I'm like, changing? And so I challenged him, no more rape exceptions, and he looked me in the eyes and promised no more rape exceptions. And he went back and he changed the culture in Texas, because they had an exception in the ultrasound bill 9 months earlier, and after that, no more exceptions in Texas. He changed the whole culture.